What was Christ's family first sermon in Mark chapter 7 verses 9 to 13?
In that Mark account, Jesus Christ had criticized the Pharisees for something they often did. The Pharisees would allow for people to give the kind of support that God Almighty wanted them to give to their parents to them instead. If, for example, they were going to help their parents pay rent or give a gift to their parents, the Pharisees would teach that if you were to give it to them, God Almighty would be equally okay if you were to give it to your parents. And Christ said that they were actually making the laws of God of none effect by their tradition. And when we think about it, it makes sense because what God Almighty had actually commanded his people was that they were supposed to honor their father and their mother, if you read Exodus chapter 20 verse 12. But the Pharisees were trying to take this honor upon themselves by saying, well, God Almighty did say that, but if you give that support to us, then God Almighty will see that as an equivalent thing, the same thing. Whereas God Almighty had never actually commanded that. The Pharisees decided to add that to God's commandments. And if you read Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2 and Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 and 19, you can see God Almighty condemned that behavior of trying to emphasize things he has not commanded and not emphasize things that he has commanded. I mean, you think the Pharisees would bother asking how people were taking care of their parents? Nah, that's not important. They would only ask how they're taking care of them. Have you paid your tithes? Are you faithful to the Lord? Kind of thing. It was all about greed. It was about how they could gain and exploit the people. And if you read Titus chapter 1 verses 10 to 11, Paul the Apostle spoke about similar people in his time who were clearly just teaching things for the sake of getting money from the people. He said, "For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake." See also Isaiah chapter 56 verses 10 and 11, and Micah chapter 3 verses 5 and 6. And I think another thing we learned from this Mark text is the concept of family first. Jesus Christ was trying to show us that this idea of putting the pastor or the church before our family isn't exactly how God Almighty said it. It's the family that comes first. If you read 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 5, you can see that Paul the Apostle mentioned that if someone wants to lead the church of God, they have to first make sure their own house is in order. He said, "For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God?" And if you even read Matthew chapter 5 verses 23 to 24, you can see that Christ said that if someone were to offer their gift before the altar, and while there they will remember that they had a conflict with somebody had something against them, they should first of all resolve that dispute before going to offer that thing they wanted to give to God. So it's all about priorities and knowing what God Almighty has actually put first. And I want to round off with the fact that when we read stuff that the Pharisees did, we shouldn't just think that it's only in the past. There are many pastors who are doing exactly what the Pharisees did then. I mean, how many times will you hear a pastor ask how your parents are doing and whether you're taking care of them and so on, and whether that money you want to give to the church, you've used it to do charity for others and so on? No, they don't care about any of that. It's whether you've brought that to the offering plate, because that's what goes to them. They don't get anything if you offer it to anyone else, but if you give it to them, then it goes into their pocket. Or the way they take over weddings now, so that the parents who've spent 20-something years raising their children, they don't have the authority to wed them. It's the pastor who doesn't even know these people who's wedding them. I feel that it's a little bit like that saying in loco parentis, right? You're usurping authority that God Almighty is not given. And I think that it's possible to run a church completely differently, where we're not involving ourselves in matters that God Almighty hasn't really allotted for us.
So, I think that answers the question as to what Christ's family first sermon was. I know that this is one of the tougher subjects, but as children of God, I guess these are just some of the things we should know if we want to be able to live the way God Almighty has instructed us.
Anyway, if you enjoyed this video and learned something new today, then I'd appreciate if you click the like button and also the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when we come back with yet another video just like this, you can click the notification bell. And if you're interested in any of the topics that are flashing before you now as the end screens, then you can check those out, because just like this video, we also go into detail about other topics and look at how the Bible speaks about them. Anyway, have a good day and God bless you.